To see you all. Thank you for being here on the first day of fake summer, where you could be in your air-conditioned homes, but you're here for this wonderful event. We couldn't be more excited. I'm Joel Whitney, part of the team that brings arts and culture events here to the library. I'm excited to have Siddhartha here to help launch his new novel, The Light at the End of the World, with Nishant Batsha. Connecting India's tumultuous 19th and 20th centuries to its distant past and its potentially apocalyptic future, this sweeping tale of rebellion, courage, and brutality reinvents fiction for our time. He jumps around Delhi, the near future. Bibi, a low-ranking employee of a global consulting firm, is tasked with finding a man long thought to be dead, but who appears to be the source of a vast collection of documents. Bhopal, 1984, an assassin tracks his prey through an Indian city that will shortly be the site of the worst industrial disaster in the history of the world. Calcutta, 1947, a veterinary student's life and work connect him to an ancient Vedic aircraft that might stave off genocide. And in 1859, a British soldier rides with his detachment to the Himalayas in search of the last surviving leader of an anti-colonial rebellion. Now, before I introduce you to Nishant and Siddhartha, let me remind you that you are welcome here. This is a house of books, and it's your house. You're all welcome here. And for those of you here the first time, you can follow us on our website landing page at bklynlibrary.com/BPL Presents. Our department producing these events is also on all social media as BPL Presents, so please stay in touch, yeah? If you ask a question at the end of our talk, we're going to have a brief interview, a reading, another interview, and then questions from you. Please be mindful of the fact that you're on our live Facebook stream, and I should say hello to everyone at home watching this event in the comfort of your air conditioners. So, our guest of honor, Siddhartha Deb, was born in northeastern India and lives in Harlem, New York. He is the author of the novels The Point of No Return, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, and An Outline of the Republic, longlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award. His nonfiction book, The Beautiful and the Damned, was a finalist for the Orwell Prize and received the PEN Open Book Award. Deb's journalism and essays have appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, The New Republic, N+1, The Nation, and Dissent. And of course, the book of honor tonight will be on sale with our moderator, Nishant Batsha's book as well. Nishant is the author of the novel Mother Ocean, Father Nation from Echo 2022, an NPR Books We Loved pick. And the forthcoming A Bomb Placed Close to the Heart is coming out in 2025. A writer of fiction and history, his writing has appeared in Lapham's quarterly narrative, The Believer, and more. Will you please welcome Nishant and Siddhartha? Thanks.
Is this on? So this is a big book, both in length but also in its capacity. It brims with life and vitality. It brims with joy. It brims with a hallucinatory vision of the world as it unfolds and could have unfolded. And so it's a book where we don't see the edges of things. It's where we see the ways in which things bleed into other things. The past bleeds into the present, bleeds into our fever dreams. So I exhort you, if you haven't done so, you should buy this book. You should read this book. You should tell your librarians to buy this book, and they should stock it wherever you might find books. It is just a wonderful joy to have read. It takes you into an India that is unknowable and intimate, a leviathan that does not know how many limbs it has. It's been a pleasure to read this book, and I'm very excited to talk with Siddhartha today. We're going to mix up the way in which we do this event. We're going to start with a few questions. We're going to take a pause, and then Siddhartha will read a short selection, and we'll return to the conversation before we open it up to the audience. So I've had the pleasure of actually reading all of Siddhartha's work over the last, decade and change. And so one of the pleasures of reading this book was I saw elements of his work that came before in the pages of this one. And so one of those elements was the figure of the journalist. And I know you were a journalist before you became a teacher of creative writing, even before you became a novelist. And so I want to know, what is it about journalism why does it keep reappearing in your works? Because it was in Outline of the Republic, your second novel, and The Beautiful and the Damned was a work of journalism itself, and BB in this book is a sort of post-journalist, detritus journalist, you could say. And so why does journalism appear and reappear in different ways throughout your work?
Well, it's an irony because in so many ways I hate news and I hate the media, and I think one of the ways in which I keep myself sane as a human being, one of the ways in which I keep myself imaginative as a reader and as a writer is I actually don't follow the news or the media very much at all. When I need to write a magazine piece or when I need to do a journalistic assignment, then I do find out what I need to find out. But I don't watch mainstream media here. I don't watch it in India. It's just demented. It's become completely demented. I think, Arundhati Roy called it Fox News on acid, which is a very accurate description. But I do love journalism. And so, in a way, it sort of captures so much of, my writing because I still have this childlike idea of the reporter as a hero. And I used to read a lot of Tintin comics when I was young. And my favorite lines were always when he says, "Tintin, reporter." And then when I got older, I realized that he never does any assignments. There's no editor. Who is he reporting for? He's just going around to all these places in the world. And he never has a story to turn in. There's no deadline. There's no payment. But I love that Tintin reporter, And so I have this idea, and of the journalist as this kind of hero, this detective, basically, going out and I do still love that aspect. I love reporting still. I love the idea of going out to places where I don't necessarily belong, where I meet people who I would not normally get to meet with, and they open up their lives. I get to see those lives. So that's the thing I like about journalism. So the journalism for me, the journalist figure, I think, is this sort of hero figure, but in a world where journalism itself has collapsed. And that is true for Bibi, because when we begin the novel with her, all we know is that she has stopped being a reporter for many years, and we don't know why. Why she just keeps talking about that last assignment where things went wrong. And so the journalist is this detective, hero, adventurer figure for me. But at the same time, I absolutely loathe so much of the media.
You're probably in very good company. Even though your characters, let's say, aren't practicing journalists, there is a sense of journalism that is present in your work. Particularly, I think of, throughout this book, characters will address the audience, or the reader, directly. And it reminds me of the very simple journalistic dictum that, vox populi, vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God. And in a sense, we're getting the voice of a particular person explaining great atrocities sometimes, factory disasters, the lead up to the Bhopal gas disaster, the famine in West Bengal before World War II. And they are addressing the reader directly. They are speaking in the first person. And it reminds me of, in a radio broadcast, when you hear that clip from the man on the street or the woman on the street, talking about whatever lived experience is relevant to the story at hand. And so I was just wondering, does that sort of sensibility pervade your work because you were a journalist, or is it a particular mode of storytelling that you're interested in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, both. I mean, as a journalist, all the examples that you picked, I have spent time in Bhopal interviewing survivors of the chemical spill, the disaster, the accident. I have interviewed workers who were at the factory, people who were in the city when the toxic gases spewed out on December 2nd. I love reporting, and part of the reason I love reporting is that it gives me a chance to listen to people. I become the listener. I hear people's stories, and people have stories to tell. They don't have to be formally educated or formally artists. People have incredible stories to tell. And people are generally quite good at telling their stories if you can, you know, if you can listen to them properly. So yeah, so a lot of that is the initial impulse. I mean, again, like, you know, the reporting in the, say, among the working class in India for The Beautiful and the Damned, hanging out with the factory workers in these terrible, terrible, ghastly conditions, where at first they don't want to talk to you. And it's completely understandable because you're like, you might come from another planet because you are so well fed. They are basically feeding their bodies into the factory. That's what it is to be a migrant worker. And so, yeah, the initial impulse comes from that, or the famine, in the case of the Bengal famine, where I'm not a reporter, obviously, but, you know, I use the communist artist Chitta Prasad. He was a visual artist, but he also, so he went around doing sketches and wrote this pamphlet of the Bengal famine, and the British promptly banned it because, you know, they wouldn't allow you to, you know, talk about journalism. The word famine was banned from the newspaper, and then the word starvation was banned the next day from the newspaper, you know, and that's how 3 million people die. But so it comes from there. But then, of course, this is a novel, and in some sense, it's not a journalistic novel at all, even though there is a journalist character. And the reason I think I have the characters sometimes speaking in their first person is because it's a way to accommodate multiple voices, to make the novel polyphonic, because otherwise, you know, it's one central character's point of view, whether in the first person or third person for 100, 200 pages. But a one person is limited to a certain class, a certain strata of society. But sometimes you have these characters, they are almost like speaking to you directly in a monologue. And it's just a way to, you know, it's a big novel. So one of the pleasures of a big novel is you can do that. You can have a character speak for 3 pages or 4 pages and just give you his or her account very directly. And yeah, so it's a kind of way to accommodate these sort of multiple voices in a big novel.
Now, I don't want people to get the wrong sense of this book, that it is just atrocity and the recounting of disaster. There is a lot of joy and playfulness, both with language, but also with character setting, the transformations that bodies undergo. And I think that was a departure for you from your previous work. So I want you to speak a little bit to where did this impulse come from? Why now?
Yeah, so I guess the dominant model of literature in English for South Asia, for India, Pakistan, it's been largely been realism. I mean, you know, there was the initial sort of with Salman Rushdie in the, you know, with Not Children, there was this initial sort of flourishing of magic realism, but it kind of disappeared, and it's kind of interesting. I think it has to do with how imaginations work, how corporate publishing works, how markets work. And realism really became the sort of the dominant mode. And I have worked in that mode myself, and the first 2 novels were in that mode. But at a certain point with, you know, it became, for me, not sufficient to capture the weirdness of India. And I mean the weirdness in many ways. The weirdness of Modi as a kind of a right-wing figure, the weirdness of Trump here as a right-wing figure, the real weirdness of climate change. I mean, the fact that we are, you know, the strangeness of the pollution in Delhi, the color of the sky, the fact, it's all around us, the fact that the weather is not predictable from week to week in any part of the world. This is very, very strange. And I think I began to find that realism wasn't really able to grasp that, or the kind of incredible political violence, or the kind of transformations that are happening. So I wanted to read a kind of playful novel. I wanted to read a non-realist novel that could go into all these things, that could go into conspiracies, that could go into climate change, that could go into myth-making. Because one of the fascinating things that has happened in both India and the US is that you know, I talked about this a little bit yesterday at the Strand as well, that liberalism and realism are very closely intertwined together, and fantasy belongs completely to the right wing, right? And I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to do liberal realism, and I didn't want it to be that the fantasy about myth or myth making or the past, that it just belongs to the right wing. I wanted to do something very different. And so I wanted something much more playful. And then, then I said, I have to write this novel myself because nobody else is writing. Nobody else is doing a novel that is speaking to, that is trying these different forms, that is playing with, magic, with realism, that is twisting realism. Because the settings are very real and very historical and or contemporary, very researched, but then the novel starts veering away into the strange, into the weird, into the uncanny. That is one of the things I really like. And so that is, that's one of the things I try to do in this novel.
I mean, it is living through climate collapse is a very strange feeling. I myself live upstate, and there was a blizzard this past winter, and there was 50 inches of snow in 24 hours that then melted within 2 days. And it felt as if it never had happened. It felt as if it was this strange, horrific dream where 50 people died in the city. And, it made very little sense to someone who even suffered through it. And now this is big books deserve big questions. And I think of course, Amitav Ghosh, and who's grappling with the Anthropocene and how fiction has to respond to it. Is realism not the mode of telling the story of climate change? Must we move to a different register?
Well, Ghosh has talked about it in his essays that realism it finds it hard because it finds too hard to deal with climate change because realism is so centered in the bourgeois, capitalist, very rational world. And that's not what storytelling was before the rise of the bourgeoisie or the rise of colonialism and capitalism. Storytelling has always played with myth and magic and transformations, but that's not what the novel is. That I don't want to make any prescriptive, but for me, in this novel, certainly realism was not the way to deal with either climate collapse or fascism or colonialism. It was strict realism just wasn't enough. If it was, I would have probably done it. Even like something like Bhopal, which is like the worst industrial disaster in the world, there is something uncanny about the fact that it has been completely wiped out from the memory, not just in the.
I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with Bhopal here.
Exactly. So I don't know. Do you want to do a gloss on it? Well, Bhopal is basically the American Dow Chemicals-owned Union Carbide factory in Bhopal, and that is the central strand of one of the novellas in this book. But basically, it's amazing that people don't remember it here. And people don't remember it in India either. It's completely forgotten. But it is the worst industrial disaster. It is not Chernobyl. It is not Fukushima. The number of people who died there were in the double digits. In Bhopal, 3,000 people died in 24 hours. 20,000 people died over the last 15 years. But when you say this, people start thinking you're saying something out of conspiracy. But this is documented data. When the accident happened, people fled, the elite fled in private planes and helicopters. When the Union Carbide refused to reveal the proprietary, and they said it's proprietary information, we can't give you the details about the gas, you just need to drink some water and have some iodine and you'll be fine. When the compensation happened, the Union Carbide said $1 per dead is plenty good for an Indian. I am quoting. I am a journalist. I have done this in nonfiction. And so then I thought that you can't deal with it just in nonfiction. You have to deal with it in some other way as well, perhaps. And so the Bhopal factory becomes this uncanny thing. It is not just this outpost of American capitalism and the Indian state. It is those things, but it is also something more. It is something almost otherworldly at the same moment. And so that's one of the ways in which, I twisted realism because these numbers are staggering. But, it doesn't have to be just about the large numbers. It can also be about our everyday experiences, whether it's 50 people in Buffalo, or if you think about the pandemic, that's the best example of the uncanny. We all sat around the world for 1 year almost in our places. We couldn't go there. And now we have forgotten about it. There is, except for some people who suffer from long COVID, who are particularly, it's disappeared from public conversation. It's like it never happened. And that is really uncanny and magic. And I think realism is perhaps wasn't for me the best way to grapple with it. And that's why I tried this more twisted, warped realism.
I think the only time I remember Bhopal entering the sort of American mindset was the culture jamming duo, the Yes Men. This was in the early 2000s, went on CNN or national television dressed as Dow Chemical officials saying they were going to give reparations to all the affected, and Dow Chemical's stock, tanked, and then it came out that these were two people just pretending to be representatives from the company, but it was only through satire that Bhopal was able to enter a sort of American consciousness. So I think it's true then that realism can't tackle head-on these calamities, but rather than talking around this, maybe we should give the audience a chance to hear a little bit of the texture of the book with your reading.
So I'll read a little bit from the first novella. And this is not one of the central characters, but this is what Nishant was talking about, where a character kind of steps out and talks about his or her experience directly. And it's a man called Mohinder. I took the iron road out of my village in the spring of the millennium, the migrant train rocking its way over the mud-drenched plains. New century, same old world, millions of us riding the trains, millions doing ghost labor shifts at demonic mills, millions never in the records of companies that evaded medical costs and pensions by keeping us off their books. One bright morning in Himachal, a boy who roomed with us did not return from the spring where he had gone to fetch water. I found him lying next to the jerrycans, dead, but with not a scratch on him, suggesting almost that he had left his body temporarily and might return at any moment. None of us knew who really was, where he had come from. Among his meager belongings, we found prescriptions, receipts, X-rays from a hospital in Bhopal. Nasir, a cutter in a garment factory, and Deepak, who worked with me moving drums of fluorescent dye across a slimy floor, had some schooling and looked through those things together. They took a long time about it. Then they began to quarrel. Deepak said the boy had some fatal sickness they had told him about in the Bhopal hospital, some fever of the lungs that eventually killed him. Nasir said we should take the papers to someone, maybe a journalist. They had been experimenting on him in the hospital, he said. In the X-rays, you could see something like lights inside his body. Like the New Delhi monkey man, he said, who with his special helmet and special buttons and special shoes was able to leap from building to building. We knew no reporters and let them squabble. Then everyone had to go to their shifts and the papers were forgotten. Within 3 days, a supply order was cancelled. The lines closed down. We were all out of work and went our separate ways. No special powers came to me at the garment factory in Punjab where I went after that. I found no invention that could ease my burden at the steel factory in Goa, where I worked next as a tongs man, my face covered with a mask of rags, my hands encased in safety gloves I had to pay for out of my own wages. There, I shuffled to the beat of the production line with another tongs man, the two of us using giant tongs to seize a red-hot rod as it shot out of the furnace, moving it to the cooling tank, stepping in and out like dancing bears on a chain, responding to the call of that factory fire, vomiting out metal bones, in and out with body braced to take rods that weighed 70 pounds each. In the dead of the night, when the liquor had been almost finished, and the film on the television flickered with letters rather than pictures, we talked about rumors of supervisors who came to a bad end, of spirits who haunted factory floors, of workers who acquired special powers. The right words, said at the right moment, could give you the ability to leap through time so that you never felt the iron cage of work shifts. Some spells could turn you invisible when the ticket checker's eyes fell on you on the railway platform. Still others endowed you with the capacity to produce government papers, identity cards, and legacy documents that would prove you had entered India before the cutoff date. Someone then inevitably talked of the New Delhi monkey man, whose buttons, flickering blue or red, had frozen his pursuers, neutralizing the Delhi police with their red and blue lights on vans that said, "For you, with you, always."
That's wonderful. Thank you. That was wonderful. And you'll notice, you've probably already noticed, that none of my questions have to do with craft or the writing of the book. I find those terribly boring. I'm more interested in you as a figure and your writing and sort of the ideas and memory that went into the writing of this book. So switching gears a little bit towards memory, one of the novellas in this features a character who is a vet or studying to be a vet. And in your first book, Point of Return...
Veterinarian.
Yes. Yes, sorry. The father figure, Dr. Dham, in that book was also a veterinarian. And so it's always interesting for me to see characters return in this case, very different ways. In your first book, he was telling the story of an old man, and now here we see the man in the moment, at the moment of his education. So what does the figure of the vet do? Is it biographical? Is it, is there sort of a nostalgia with it, or why has it reappeared?
I think that's all true. The nostalgia. My father was a veterinarian in Assam, and yes, he certainly, in some sense, serves as a basis for the character in the first novel, The Point of Return. And yes, in this novel, we see a young 21-year-old young man at a college run by the British in Calcutta just before the end of colonialism and the beginning of partition and the Holocaust. So I suppose if a reporter is one kind of hero to me, I think a veterinarian is another kind of hero for me, because I'm very interested in boundaries and the fluidity of boundaries. I mean, this novel is very much about that. Men and women, human beings and animals, human beings and machines, human intelligence and AI, or cybernetics, cyber-consciousness, right? I'm interested in the fluidity between these things, because I am very interested in the question of, by doing that, what does it mean to be human, right? And so, I mean, for me, of course, some of it comes out of memory of, seeing my father. And in the Indians' context, a veterinarian was not a very glamorous figure. I mean, to begin with, it's a government job. It's not a private job. It's something you did for the government. And you were not looking after very expensive pets. It had to do with farm animals for mostly very poor villagers. And particularly in the northeastern part of India where my father grew up, where he was working, tribal villagers, where the animals are everything, the economy, subsistence, but also, your lives are very connected to the animals that you have. And so for me, I think the veterinarian figure kind of is like this, like a journalist, goes between worlds. And in this case, the world of human beings and the world of animals, and between the world of medicine, which is kind of quote-unquote rational and scientific, and the world of animals, which opens up questions of the soul. So one of the essays that I love is by John Berger, called Why Look at Animals? And John Berger talks about how human beings and their relationship to animals changed drastically in 19th century with industrial capitalism. That's when zoos show up. That's when zoos become these aspects of municipal imperial power, and as a way to display your prowess, that you've gone around the world and you've collected, the rhinoceros, or you've collected a gorilla. So I think the veterinarian allows me to explore those things. And in this case, of course, between the conscious and the unconscious, because he's a veterinarian who is also undergoing some kind of psychoanalysis.
It also lends itself very well to the fantastical. My mother's brother was a veterinarian, and because he was 20 years older than my mother, there's these bizarre stories of his experience. He was down in Jharkhand and in Hazaribagh, of like a tiger cub being abandoned, and then the tiger cub is raised in his house for a certain amount of weeks before he hands it back to the state. And the state is always there, as you say, with the veterinarian. Like, he gets to take care of it for a moment and then hands it back to state power for it to then, relocate. But it seems as if they're always bridging, at least in the subcontinent, at a certain point in time, was bridging the gap between the quotidian and the fantastical.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and that is one of the things that this novel is very interested in. And in that sense, I think it also participates in a kind of, to move away from novels and realism, but folk storytelling is full of transformations in Bengal, in the Northeast. I mean, there are just these, and these are stories that I've encountered as a child, both as told stories, oral form, as song, as folk songs, and then, of course, as children's books, and then in adventure books. So there are always these stories of, like, there's a beautiful song called Hostir Konna, which is from Assam, and it's a song that elephant mahouts who work with elephants sing to their elephants, because one of the things that elephant mahouts do is that they sing to their elephants, and apparently elephants like being sung to. But one of the songs is The Elephant Daughter, and it is all about this human woman who, by the end in the story, is about how cruel humanity is, and the elephants say, "Just come and live with us and become an elephant. Why do you have to be a human? Because humans will just be treating each other badly. Just be with us and be treated well." And that's what happens in the story. Or there are these stories about tiger. These are you find them all over Bengal and Meghalaya and Assam, where the typical form is somebody is a guest in a strange place, and the landlord of the manor says, "Don't go out at dark because the tigers are there." And at a certain point, the suspicion enters this guest that maybe the person telling me is actually the tiger going out at night, kind of like a werewolf figure, transforms into a tiger at night, and therefore is asking me not to go out at night. And so, the boundaries between humanity and the non-human have been very fluid until enlightenment and capitalism and colonialism and rationality showed up. And I think now is a great time to explore the fluidity between these things again in a time of climate change. This whole question, when it's really like, it's what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a life form? And yeah, I sort of play with that a lot in this book.
The climate scientists speak of the urban wildland interface as one of the forefronts of climate change. The space in which civilization is supposed to end and wildlife is supposed to begin, we're now sort of bleeding into that interchange. And this is where the real catastrophe of climate change occurs. In California, when you build too far into the hills, that's where the fires begin, and that's where human catastrophe occurs. And in China, when you go deeper into the forest, the pangolin is able to transfer the virus to the people who then have to deal with COVID.
Exactly.
And so it seems to me then that we must sort of like embrace the urban wild interface and write from within it to be able to speak of the moment we live in. It seems like that is the place in which storytelling happens. And does it seem odd to you that India is ripe with these kind of stories, that it sort of has been lost? And I know you gave a few reasons. There are many reasons, mainly having to do with a one-way exchange of ideas. But is it strange to you that it wasn't rediscovered in the post-colonial era, this form of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a mystery to me why that's the case. But I mean, I think post-colonialism itself, in some ways, was obsessed with. Post-colonialism is very influenced by colonialism, and there have been examples of this, but they are not dominant. And I think a lot of South Asian writing, particularly in English, is often very interested in the question of family, which is a very rich and interesting topic, and I've worked at it myself. But that's often that's a boundary, that's a framework within which it is hard to deal with other questions, because then you have to go beyond the idea of the family and the human family. but maybe it is beginning to happen. I have certainly started noticing it more among younger writers, actually. So yeah, I mean, and I think, and again, to go back, I mean, there is a kind of a right-wing version of this, which is quite terrifying. And you've seen it here too with Trump, and this sort of there's a kind of myth-making capacity that the right has, and part of it is that I think it has moved into it because it has been vacated out. I mean, not to get too didactic about it, but what is it that Max Weber calls disenchantment? That we live in rationality, so there is no space for magic anymore. There is no space for enchantment anymore. And sometimes that's what the right does. That's what the right channels it into these really sort of, these terrifying modes. But there are these other utopian traditions of possibilities of channeling fantasy and myth making.
And then there are many ghosts throughout this novel, both literal and also figurative. There are places that are ghosts in this. One ghost-like place is, to me, the northeast of India. Sort of appears in passing throughout the novel, but we're never actually particularly situated in the present. There are lots of memories and horrific things that occur in, say, Assam, but we're never the through line of action doesn't necessarily occur in the Northeast. And the Northeast has appeared throughout your work. Both your first two novels were set in it, and the character of Esther from The Beautiful and the Damned has a sort of mirror image in Moy in this book. And so what is it about the ghostliness, or why does the Northeast appear as this sort of ghostly referent in your work, and especially in this book?
Well, the Northeast is also an in-between place. It's basically an example of what the anthropologist James Scott calls zomia, which is like the highlands, which fall between these big, quote-unquote, civilizations of India and China and Vietnam. The highlands are where you go to escape, and James Scott is an anarchist historian, so he's very critical of the state. So the highlands is where people flee, where people go to be free, where you don't pay taxes, where you don't get conscripted into the army, where you don't get drafted. And because it's the highlands, because it's the mountains, you have a kind of, a plurality of languages and traditions. You have matriarchy in the Northeast, in parts of the Northeast, right? And that's possible because you're away from these great capital accumulating powers along the river valleys. So for me, that's one aspect of the Northeast. It's a liminal space. But of course, in practical terms, I mean, the first two novels are set squarely in the Northeast. But Northeast is literally, it's described in India. The British called it the Northeastern Frontier Area Agency. That's how they, so, it's the frontier. It's between India and Burma, between India and China. And so it lends itself very well, in some sense, to this novel, because this is also talking about the boundaries. But the first two novels were set squarely in the Northeast, and then with The Beautiful and the Damned, I said, I won't write about the Northeast because people don't understand it, and I don't live there anymore anyway. But it kind of shows, makes its way back into my books, even when I say I'm done with writing about it. And the same thing happened here. At a certain point, it became clear to me that even though Bibi is living in Delhi, that she has made this journey that I made, but she did it much later. She's younger than me, the character in the book. But she's also made this journey from the Northeast, 3,000 miles west to Delhi, and there's a sense of loss. There's just layers of loss. Because, of course, Bibi's family is not actually from the Northeast, but are from what is today another country, Bangladesh, which is true of my family too. So there are just layers and layers and layers of memories and loss. And I think but it's both. It's loss, but it's also zomia. It's also a place of possible liberation.
And there are many, I wouldn't say sites of liberation in this book. It feels very Lynchian to me, this book. A lot of people have mentioned Don DeLillo. I've seen Marquez. I've seen Salman Rushdie reference. But to me, there's a sort of Lynchian core to this book. There's a sort of nightmare that exists right under the surface. But also, it's
David Lynch. Yes, yeah.
David Lynch, the American director, most famous for most recently Twin Peaks. And it was actually a line in the second Twin Peaks that I was reminded of, and I have my little notes in the beginning of the book. So David Lynch plays a character in Twin Peaks, The Return, as a detective, And he says, you know, I had a Monica Bellucci dream again. And in this Monica Bellucci dream, Monica Bellucci herself says, we are like the dreamer who dreams and lives inside the dream, but who is the dreamer? And there's a sense of this book, especially in the end, where I feel like we are living inside a dream, and is it AI who is streaming this book? Is it one of the characters streaming up this book? So there's a sense of a sort of dream forcibly making its way into reality throughout this book. And I wanted to, one, ask you, you know, were you thinking of David Lynch at all in the writing of this? Because that would have been a waste of a question if you weren't. But also, you know, how does the dream and reality or AI's vision of the world play into this book a little bit? It's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I do like David Lynch's work a lot, I have to admit. I mean, and you know, and I was introduced to his work only when I came here because there was not a lot of American television. And, you know, there was no television until I was 14 because I grew up in the Northeast. There were no television sets. There was no transmission. But yeah, when I came here, obviously one of the things that, you know, you enjoy is like just this enormous wealth of books and films and television shows that are here, that is possible. And so I watched Twin Peaks, like the original Twin Peaks. I watched it like a good maybe 20 years after it had been broadcast because, you know, I'd always heard about it as this sort of the greatest television show ever made. And I have to admit, I love Twin Peaks. And I think what he does, what I really like, is he takes the normality, the picture-perfect American town, suburban town, and he takes these types, the high school footballer, the cheerleader, and then he just turns it inside out. And it's not just one turn. Because no art does that, right? But David Lynch does, it's one layer, and then another layer, and another layer, and another layer. Yeah, I find it fascinating, and it is slightly there's a kind of hallucinating quality about it. There's also like UFOs, there's also, Native American lore. And I was working on this novel in parallel with watching Twin Peaks. But yeah, that is a sensibility I very much like. And yeah, it pleases me greatly if people, make that kind of a comparison because I think I'm also taking like these standard myths of Hanuman or the Vedic aircraft, which is usually channeled by the right wing, and I'm turning them inside out, that there's something more. But I'm also taking these really historical moments, which realism deals with very well. Partition, they're great partition novels. There aren't great 1984 Bhopal novels for some odd reason. There is only Indra Sinha's novel. But, there are great partition novels. There are historical novels. There are even Modi fascism novels. But none of them do that Lynchian, that you begin there, but then you open a trap door and something else appears. And then you open another trap door and something else appears. And for me, that is one of the joys of storytelling and like playing with storytelling, playing with form. Otherwise, it's just too depressing to think about fascism and climate change and calamity and the end of the world. That's where the storytelling comes in. And David Lynch, there's that joy too. He's often dealing with very dark things, but there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of intrigue, it's very interesting. That's how you keep going with it. He's absolutely.
The world could be fun.
Yeah, it must be.
It has to be because we're living in it right now. We have to have some sensibility of fun, even as it all comes apart. The wheels come off the car as it's driving, and there is one last bit of joy that I want to touch upon in my line of questioning, and that is sort of. You actually posted this on Twitter today, was an article you wrote some years ago in the New York Times about parenting and the writing of a novel. And at the end of your acknowledgments, you have this very loving letter to your son about him and your artistic process. And in the article from, I think it was 2016, you wrote, "What could the planning of meals and the sorting of laundry have to do with the writing of a maximalist novel?" And then you answer the question saying there are similarities of uncompensated labor done with love and rigor. And did you feel that sort of love of your own son coming throughout this book? It must have been based on that letter, but I would love for you to expand on it.
Yeah, I mean, so it's, I mean, I wrote it in conjunction as while I was also, a father and, learning to be a father and raising a child. And I think one of the things that, and as you know, Nishant has two beautiful children who he just sang to because it was their bedtime just before he came in here. Uh, but, it's a lot of labor. And as we know, it's traditionally been done by women, and it's traditionally been considered, it's uncompensated, it's unappreciated at the level of the state or at the level of the economy. And I think like when as a man, when you think about being an artist, it's like, oh my God, having a family, being a parent is going to just end my artistic career. And that was certainly a fear that I had. And I think when I wrote the New York Times piece, I said, this is just not true. Because actually there's a lot of similarities between the two tasks. They both take imagination and they take love, and they do take rigor to me. They take some level of discipline, some level of organization. But you can do both, and they can actually feed each other. And I think, yeah, I mean, for me, I have a lot of memories of writing this book after picking up my son from school, and while he's like, reading out there, and this is at the age when, by this time, he's a voracious reader. So he's just reading over there, and I've given him a snack, and I'm just working on the little novel, and I would read him little bits, from the more fun bits, including the New Delhi Monkey Man. And I think, and we were talking about this even before we came in, I think there is something, again, like I talked about animals, and I think with adults, there's something you can learn from being with children. At least that was true for me. And I was not expecting this. I thought it would be all drudgery. But that was not the case. There was a lot of, what the Indian poet Tagore talks about play and how adults lose the sense of play. That's what children have, and that's what adults don't have. Now, in this world, even children don't have play very often. I think with the pandemic, that's one of the things we missed very much, the chance to play. So, yeah, I mean, I think that playfulness was very much a part of writing this novel, and I found them going together very well in hand. So, writing a novel, writing a big novel, and raising a child. And, as I say in my acknowledgement, my son has now outstripped the book because, he's still growing. The novel is done, but he's still growing, inshallah. So.
I think that's a great place to end our conversation. And if there are any audience questions, I think we could open it up.
I did actually have a lot of fun writing the book. I think for me, it was a big book, so I knew it would take a lot of time. And I cannot, I mean, even though I wanted to be, I can't be a full-time writer because I have a full-time teaching job. I did a lot of journalism, and sometimes I didn't want to do the journalism, but I felt I had to because it was speaking directly to the moment. It was important. And then there was the parenting and living. But, I think I enjoyed myself. Otherwise, it's very hard to keep going for 7 years, working on a book pretty much every summer, 7 summers, essentially, if you are not enjoying it. But I think one of the things I really enjoyed was that I found that this was my 4th book, that I was at ease with my practice. And I liked the routine. And there were days when things were bad, when the writing didn't go well. There were sometimes those days became weeks. But I think I've learned enough about writing to know by now that unlike when I was young, I would panic and I would say, I'm a failure, I'm terrible, And it's not that I don't have those thoughts. But now I think I know enough to know that, okay, this is maybe a bad 2 weeks because you're really struggling. But eventually the breakthrough will come, whatever I'm struggling with. I'm trying to find the right voice for this character or the right turn in the story. But, I just said, I am going to write this book. And I didn't know that publishers would want it because corporate publishing particularly, I'm just so grateful to the publishers that they're doing this book because it's such a risk for them. But when I did The Beautiful and the Damned and it was successful, I mean, corporate publishing wanted me to do another nonfiction book that was exactly like that one, right? And I didn't want to because, that was good. And I may go back to nonfiction again. But I said, let me do something different. Let me do a novel. Let me do something that can talk about Bhopal, but not in a reporter's voice, in a more demented voice. So I absolutely had fun writing it. And, it's one of the most beautiful things and which you can hold on to, it doesn't matter. I mean, this is lovely, but, even if it doesn't get published, which happens to very good books, very good writers, but that's only the moment, right? This is what you do day after day. You write day after day. And I absolutely had fun doing it. It was great. It was very pleasurable. I knew I was doing something interesting. I knew I didn't have the answers. I didn't know where the story was going. So there was a lot for me to find out. I had an initial structure, and absolutely it changed because the form, and I am very, I'm very, very, I love form. And, I don't want to give you the impression that this is some wild stream of consciousness novel. It's very tightly plotted. I love plot. I love tautness, in a story. I want people to read. But yeah, it's not the form I began with. At first, I had a working structure, but that had to change and adapt as we went further in. But that was part of the process.
For those unfamiliar, the book begins with a character Bibi, in which is it's set in the near future. Then we move to 1984 in Bhopal. Then we move to 1947 in Calcutta. Then we move to 1859, just after the 1857 rebellion, up in the mountains with the white Mughal. Then we return back to Bibi, who's now in the Andaman Islands. So we do. Each novella is tight and does have a tautness to it, and it almost is a collection, like Bolaño is a collection of 4 novellas that string together into a cohesive narrative.
Yeah.
Hi, so my question is with regards to your juxtaposition between realism and fantasy. Because it seems to me that we're living in times when what is real is almost fantastical. So that the task of the writer becomes, rather trying to convince decent people that what I am recording is not fantasy but actually real. So that in what you're saying, is it that what you're trying to do is to inject more fantasy into what is already fantastical, or what is, maybe, I don't know, maybe we're saying the same thing, but I'd like you to throw more light on that. Thank you.
I think I was trying to liberate. I think even though the world is very fantastical, we are constantly under pressure to just step away from the fantasy, unless we are demented right wing sort of characters with conspiracy theories. But otherwise, the impulse always is return to reality. COVID is over. Let's get back to work. Right? I mean, I think one of the examples is that should have been an opportunity for the world to really change and to learn much more about how to have solidarity and care for other human beings within cities, across the country. And clearly that is not the case. We have gone back to business as usual. We see this with the corporations. There are strikes everywhere, not just writers right now going on in the United States. That is an example of how, corporations are gouging them. So the impulse is always return to reality. I agree that the reality is fantastic, but I think maybe for me, the writer's job, it was to emphasize that and play with it. And the novel doesn't stay, it starts with realism and then it goes to the fantastic and then it comes back to realism. And it is constantly playing, it's quite dialectical, the movement. It goes back and forth between those things. And in a way, it's very alive. I mean, when I wrote this novel, there was no conversation about, the novel was done before the pandemic started. But there is a flu in the novel. And then it became reality. There was no discussion about Chat GPT, but when the discussions about Chat GPT are going on, I'm having a great time because I said I have AI writing poetry in my novel, and this was well before I knew even Chat GPT had been made public. So I think, if you are open, you can play between realism and fantasy, and it's different for every writer. It's also different for every reader because I think every reader will interpret this book somewhat differently.
I was excited to hear that you're a fan of David Lynch because I'm also a big fan of Twin Peaks. So I was just curious what you're reading now or what you're watching now that you're really excited about or interested in.
I'm always reading and watching a lot. I'm reading Vandana Singh's science fiction stories. She's a physics professor in Massachusetts and writes these amazing. She's a South Asian speculative fiction writer, and all the central characters are women and scientists. And Vandana and I are we've never met, but we mutually admire each other long distance. And I've been reading these stories of hers, and they're incredible. But, David Lynch, I'm actually quite influenced by Afrofuturism, right? And so, like, someone like Victor Laval is like a great inspiration for me. People like Nnedi Okorafor and K. Jemisin. So I am, I read, that's all the joys, right, of if you like to read and if you like to watch films. And it's not like I don't read realism or I don't watch realism. I do, I absolutely do. But yeah, right now I have been reading Vandana Singh, and then I'm going to read this massive Japanese crime novel that is actually published by Soho called Lady Joker, which starts with 1947 in Japan, and it starts with a factory worker being fired for accusation that he's a communist. And I said, okay, I'm sold. I'm going to, So that's one of the books I'm reading.
Yeah, sure. Hi. We got here a little late, so I'm sorry if you've already addressed this. But can you, if you haven't, can you riff a little bit about Roberto Bolaño, his work, what it means to you, and how it plays into this book that you've written?
Yeah, I think I started reading Bolaño I'm trying to read when he first started appearing in translation in America, and Barbara Epler at New Direction sent me a collection of Bolaño stories in manuscript to read, and said that you will love this writer. And Bolaño was by this time. And Bolaño, for those who don't know, Roberto Bolaño is a writer from Chile, but he grew up in Mexico City, and then was this very anarchic, left-wing poet, writer, and then moved to Spain, and then lived in Blanes near Barcelona, and began as a poet, but then wrote these incredibly kind of crazy, wonderful novels, often playing with detective fiction, but often writing about very violent things like the right-wing dictatorship of Pinochet in Chile, or in Mexico City, the killings of hundreds of women in the maquiladoras near the border, which he writes about in 2666. So I started reading Bolaño, and Bolaño was for me like a real liberation from New Yorker fiction. And I think I had begun to, I was still not very, I'd been in New York, America and New York only for 6-7 years. And I felt like I have to become like these writers if I am going to become a writer. And I think I was really struggling with myself because I was trying to write, these are not stories that I've published. I was writing these really tightly plotted short fiction about relationships. And I am interested in relationships, and there are relationships in this novel. But I was very caught up with this New Yorker fiction that, that's the imprimatur you have to get. And yet that was not my impulse. And I didn't want to write the kind of Indian fiction that a lot of Western editors want. The usual stereotypes, I didn't want to write like that either. So Bolaño for me, Bolaño also uses the phrase the third world, which many people will not know what that means, and that's okay. But that's a phrase that shows up in the first 20 pages of the book. And I remember when I put it down, I wrote it, I said, American editors are going to turn this book down because, you have the third world in there. What is the third world? But Bolaño uses the third world. There's a line in The Savage Detectives when they say, love us because we are poets, love us because we are from the third world. So Bolaño was liberating for me because he showed me that you could be a serious writer of literary fiction, and be interested in politics, and be interested in genre fiction, ghost stories, noir, science fiction, and you can work these things together into a really inventive form. So even though he was dead, if he wasn't dead, I think I would have written him a love letter. But he died very, very young, actually. But he was like this figure who had arrived from the Latin American writing world and had shown me a way that you can be free. And I think that's another thing about going back to the joy, the question of writing. You have to write as though you are free. We are not actually free. I don't believe that. We are mostly not free. I have a friend here, a lot of friends say, I know that. But you have to write as though you are free to write whatever you want. And I think Bolaños was a great example. He turned me away, and I said, I am never going to try to write these kind of New Yorker stories anymore.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
And if we run out of time, I promise you could ask me your questions when I'm back there behind the counter.
Congratulations on the book. I have 2 questions. The first question is BB the character kind of modeled after you, the disillusioned journalist? You talk about similarities and the character being younger, so that's the first question. The second question is about the impulse that you talk about. If I'm correct, you started writing this book around 2012, 2013, around the time when a new regime comes to power in India, and you've kind of written this book through what has been a pretty tumultuous time in the subcontinent. Were you in some ways writing to the present, or were you writing to what was happening? Did that impulse in some way affect your novel?
Yeah, thank you, Suchitra. So the first question is, BB modeled on me. A little bit, yeah. I mean, there are certain biographical similarities. She's from Shillong. She's a journalist. She lives in Delhi. She lives in Munirka village where I lived. Yeah, there's elements. But, she's also younger than me. She's like a good 12 years younger than I am. So she's a different generation. And she's her own thing. And I think with these characters, that's also one of the joys of writing, that you do have to discover the characters. And I, as a writer, I don't know everything about the character when I'm starting out. I have to find them on the page. They have to reveal themselves to me. And she did that, although it took time. The second question, yeah, I started writing it in 2013. Is it written for the present? I don't know. The thing is that all of my books, starting from the first novel, I've always had a quarrel with the idea of India. And if you've read my books, you will know this. They've always had a quarrel. This is true even before the rise of Modi and his rise to power. Even when India was this great superpower, when all the magazines of the West, when the Obama White House was inviting him to address the joint houses of Congress, but even before that, even before Modi, even with the Congress government, which is now the opposition that we support because we must, but even with the Congress government, when the Congress government is in power, I have always, The Beautiful and the Damned is pre-Modi, a lot of pre-Modi, but I have always quarreled with the idea of India in all my books. And I have no regrets about that. I am sad that my prognosis has turned out to be true, that it turned out to be just as bad or even worse than what one was depicting. But yeah, I don't know whether I'm writing for the present or the future or the past. I was just trying to open up. But yeah, in a way, I was trying to not write just about the present. That's partly why the novel is not set in a completely identifiable today's India. It's a little bit alternative. It's a little bit around the corner. This is an India where they have sent a piloted Mars mission. That hasn't happened yet. It may. This is an India where there has been serial waves of demonetization. That is just beginning to happen, which is terrifying. But I have to, it's a novel, so I have to play with the reality again and make it more imaginative. So it's written for, present and future, and the past.
I thought you were going to say one more thing. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Siddhartha. Thanks, Nishant. Thanks so much for your questions. I'm going to send you off to a signing. Siddhartha will sign his book, which is on sale from Greenlight Bookstore. I'm also going to invite you to stick around after the signing. The signing you'll buy the book from Greenlight through these doors, if you please. You'll get it signed through these doors, or you could go over this way. After your book is signed, please join us for a quick toast, a glass of wine, toasting Siddhartha and Nishant for this conversation in this galley wing over here. There's some wine waiting for you. And if you've already gotten your book signed, you can head over there right now. Now, before I send you off, I want to please beg you to come back on June 17th, because our usual annual Night of Ideas, Night of Philosophy that we do in the winter, but it got moved around several times during the pandemic, is now converting this year to a celebration of 50 years of hip-hop. It's called Night in the Library, Philosophy of Hip-Hop. That's June 17th from 7 p.m. until about 1 a.m. We don't know yet, maybe 2 a.m. We hope you'll join us. I don't know if I'm allowed to say some of the old school rappers that are coming, some scholars who are coming, and other things, but look for that. You know where to follow us. BPL Presents, our tags. It'll be throughout the building, as always. Many, many rooms will be engaged, so it'll be multiple Sophie's choices. Do I want to go to this one or that one? But without further ado, please stick around for a bit, get your book signed, and let's thank these two one more time for a great conversation.